Good morning. We're going on the record. Welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission. This is a hearing in docket number PC53. Several months ago, Governor Hogan signed into law the Relief Act, which requires that the Public Service Commission disperse $83 million in funds to needy utility ratepayers in Maryland. The commission has subsequently issued notices requiring our electric and gas utilities to provide data to assist the commission in distributing these funds. We have heard from 20 electric and gas utilities in Maryland who have responded with data to assist the commission and its staff in the allocation of these dollars to various electric and natural gas ratepayers. Today, we'll be hearing from 3 panels, including state agencies, consumer advocates, and the utilities. This hearing today will be more akin to a public comment hearing rather than the presentations or technical conference format that the commission typically has. This will be an opportunity to allow you to share your perspectives or thoughts with respect to the disbursement and allocation of this funds, as well as to provide any recommendations to the commission. This will also allow the commissioners to inquire of the parties today regarding any questions they have. I'm mindful that per statute, the commission must disperse these funds no later than June 30th of 2021. There's no question that there's a number of ways to divide and allocate these funds amongst the utilities for disbursement. I don't believe that there's any right or wrong way to equitably distribute the funds. So we are presented with a number of reasonable options which the commission may choose from when making its final determination. With that, we will begin with the receipt of comments. We'll begin by hearing from the representative from the Office of Home Energy Programs within the Department of Human Services, and that's our director, Bill Freeman. Good morning, Mr. Freeman.
Good morning, Chairman Stanek. Thank you, Chairman Stanek, for having me this morning. Good morning, commissioners and everyone else. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our use of funds and how we might best coordinate OHEP funding at present with the distribution of the Relief Act funds. This is certainly a resource-rich environment, one more so than we found ourselves in quite some time, and certainly provides an opportunity to do a lot of good. I just want to give a background on the funding that's out there. So we received notice last week that the LIHEAP funding made available through the American Rescue Plan will be $73 million. That must be spent prior to September 30th, 2022. This is in addition to the regular LIHEAP allocation, which is typically between 78 and 81 million. The state budget this year also provided an additional $10 million that OHEP must expend prior to June 30th, similar to the Relief Act timeline. And additionally, as you're aware, we previously received $19.4 million in additional LIHEAP funding through the CARES Act. And while that's fully expended, it did have the effect of us with a higher balance of regular federal fiscal year LIHEAP funding than we had anticipated. And that was in part because the projections for application increases did not come to fruition during the moratorium period. We have to spend 90% of those funds prior to September 30th, 2021 as well. So all of that adds up to a significant amount of funding that must be quickly but strategically deployed. And so to do so, what we're doing is, one, enhancing our outreach efforts for FY22 with a focus on reaching those who have never before applied, in addition to those who have had accessing the program. And we also continue to focus on reducing denial rates for missing documentation and increasing the number of successful applications. And of course, benefits for LIHEAP funded benefits will be higher in FY22. But even with these efforts, the level of funding requires other approaches to spending. And this is where the coordination comes in. So the first major effort is to use the funding available, both the $10 million made available through the state budget and the existing appropriation of FY21 LIHEAP funds to pay down the arrearages for FY21 OHEP recipients. So we've worked with utilities to gather the information for those certified prior to March 1st, and we'll be covering their arrearages through the end of February 21. So this totals $19.4 million in the initial payment. We are just off the call this morning reviewing our testing results. I'd hoped to make these payments today. We'll be making them next Wednesday. So that will be $19.4 million in arrearage transfers for FY21 recipients in the first batch. I've provided Commission staff with the file breaking down these initial arrearage payments by utility and jurisdiction to help with planning the distribution of the additional Relief Act funds. We're also planning to request updated arrearage information later in the fiscal year for those who are certified after that March 1st date, so that we can ensure that their arrearages are paid as well. Now, as you know, we're still making regular weekly arrearage payments through the existing arrearage programs. So there's a lot of, there's a bit of a moving target in terms of targeting these arrearages. There's a lot of money coming in, a lot of money still going out. And then finally, I would just add that we'll also be making a regular supplemental payment to all FY21 recipients by the end of this month. So that will average about $100 additional for the current year recipients. And we will continue to make those additional $100 average payments for all recipients certified after the date of the initial transfer. So just a couple notes in terms of recommendations beyond the coordination with the funding I just spoke of. OHEP does not feel there should be a cap on the arrearages for any household receiving arrearage forgiveness through the Relief Act. Many with the highest arrearages accumulated these high arrearages in part because of medical uses and other challenges that have only gotten worse in the last year, and they will benefit the most from the arrearage retirement. Two, customers not receiving Relief Act benefits or questioning the amount they receive should be able to inquire and appeal. And OHEP is certainly happy to coordinate with the Consumer Affairs Division on that issue so that folks feel like they have a voice there. And three, those receiving the arrearage payments directly from OHEP will receive a regular benefit notice indicating the payment of the arrearage next week. And we want to make sure that those who receive arrearage funds through the Relief Act also receive clear communication in real time. So thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions about OHEP and our role in this.
Thank you, Director Freeman. We will hold questions until we hear from the remaining two panelists. We'll next move to the representatives from the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm Fred Hoover from the Office of People's Counsel, and with me is Brandy Neelan, the Director of our Office of Consumer Assistance. I will make a few remarks regarding our recommendations to the Commission on how to distribute the funds provided by the General Assembly through the Relief Act. At the outset, I want to say that OPC disagrees with staff's view that the Relief Act funds should be allocated to customers in the state based on population and then addressing the priority order that is in the Relief Act. The Relief Act directs the Commission to use funds to eliminate residential customer arrearages in the following categories in order of priority. First, all of the arrearages for those customers who have applied and been qualified for OHEP's assistance benefits in the past 4 years. Secondly, all arrearages for residential customers with demonstrated special needs. And third, the oldest arrearages. The Relief Act's instruction for population proportionality applies to all the funds that are in sections 9 and 10 of the so-called Recovery Now Fund, which is all of the money in the Act dedicated toward relief in various ways throughout the state, not just the money that was allocated to the Commission. The specific directions to the Commission in the Relief Act are the three priorities, And it's our view that those specific instructions overrides the general proportionality language. The state, when it creates grant programs, has a goal of spreading funds among the population in the state. However, the desire for statewide impact of funds does not control the specific purpose of the grant program. OPC recommends that the Commission distribute funds from the REEF Act to customers who qualify under the 3 priorities, rather than make an allocation to the utilities first and then distribute the money according to the priorities listed in the REEF Act. OPC supports the concept that you just heard from Mr. Freeman from OHEP about utilization of the funds that OHEP has from the federal government as a way of providing the initial payment for arrearages in priority 1 situations. It's our view that that money should be applied first, and then a recalculation made as to what the arrearage situation is for those customers before Relief Act money is applied to pay off the arrearages. And then secondly, we should move to the customers that are in category 2, the special needs category, and then finally to category 3. In regards to category 3, OPC is of the opinion that the Commission should allocate all the remaining funds based on the percentage of statewide residential customer accounts and direct the utilities to prioritize elimination of the oldest arrearages. Now, our concern, as was expressed in our comments, is that the data provided so far may not be able to make that calculation as to what are the oldest arrearages. So we think the Commission should direct the utilities to the extent possible, provide more information on the oldest arrearages so that a determination can be made regarding what are the oldest arrearages so that they can be addressed as is noted in the Relief Act. And then finally, as is mentioned in our comments, we would like to see detailed reporting from the utilities regarding their distribution of the money they receive from the Relief Act, and that the Commission should order the utilities to communicate as soon as possible to the potential recipients of the Relief Act of the assistance that they were receiving in the payment of their arrearages. With that, I thank you for your consideration of our recommendations, and Brandy and I are available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. We'll next turn to technical staff for the Commission. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Good morning. James Greger on behalf of staff. I would also like to enter the appearance of Leslie Romine and Lloyd Spivak. From technical staff, we have Ben Baker and David Hoppick, and I will turn it over to Ben Baker for our staff's presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Baker, we can't hear you, although it appears that your microphone is on. There may be an issue.
My apologies. I double muted myself. All right. So once again, sorry, Benjamin Baker on behalf of staff. I'm going to give a quick presentation about our proposed methodology, and then right after that, we can take any questions that you may have. So as discussed, there's going to be 2 parts to staff's proposal where we've, I guess, prioritized the proportionality of the population across the state from the legislative directive before the allocation of funds in the priority order as OPC just discussed. And in order to accomplish that, we use count of contracts. And our view on this is basically we think that the legislature was trying to, I guess, separate those funds amongst the utilities on as proportionally as possible based off of dollars per customer across the state. So that's why you would want to think about possibly doing this on a population basis. Once again, I think you said it, Mr. Chairman, earlier, there's many ways that we can approach this final allocation. But staff is viewing that the population, if us attempting to do this based off of population is the more correct approach at this time. But we also agree that OHEP we should attempt to let OHEP first distribute their funds before we distribute our funds to the extent practicable. I mean, if OHEP needs a long time to distribute the funds, then we shouldn't, but it sounds like a lot of the money is ready to go, and so we should let them do that and then basically re-request the data from the utilities so that we can allocate the funds and hopefully get to the Category 3 customers more in depth after OHEP assists with the Category 1 customers. The mechanics of our proposal. So our method is premised on using the customer contracts, and the goal is to equally separate funds between electric and gas customers so that you're not favoring one over the other. The unique challenge because of this is that we don't know what gas customers are at what electric utility companies. So to account for this, we assume each gas customer in the state is also an electric customer, and then we lower the electric customer count for that gas customer count. And that's what we do in the first step to basically bifurcate the funds between electric utilities and gas utilities. And then the second step, we then separate the funds based on the utilities based on their contribution towards that count of contracts in that first step. Yesterday, we had a discussion with a BG&E representative who had concerns about how we were treating dual customers in our proposal. And that they indicated they weren't going to be likely supportive of our methodology, but that if the commission did determine that they agreed with our approach, that they wanted the customer counts, they would prefer to treat each gas and electric customer as a separate customer. We think that would overweight the allocation to dual customers at the expense of electric-only customers. And so to address this, though, we do have a proposed solution. For gas customers, we would weight the gas dual customer and the gas customer equally because that's how we bifurcated the money in the first step. And then in the second step, we would first determine what proportion of the funds are coming to the electric utilities from the dual customers based off the equation that is listed in step 1. And all that money would be allocated to dual customers, and then the remaining funds would go to all the electric-only customers. We think this is reasonable to address the concerns raised by BG&E. It does not address an issue of at the electric utilities where we don't know what gas customers they're serving, how their funds would be redistributed, but that's something that cannot be addressed without significant analysis. But we do propose, based off of the second step here, to revise our equation accordingly from what we filed. And then finally, once we get to that third step, we would, with the utilities, we would socialize the money across the customers according to the payment posting that was provided in the Relief Act. And that if within a category you did not cover the entire cost, we would suggest optimizing the distribution of the funds across the customers to remove as many customers from the threat of service termination. So basically a up to $1 per customer amount, such that you can get those customers with lower arrearages out from the threat of service termination. So what I have here is our estimated allocation of funds under our methodology. This is before we determine if the funds allocated to the utilities eliminate all their category 1, 2, and 3 arrearages. We would suggest that when we're doing the math at the commission to determine how to allocate these funds, if it's determined that a utility's arrearages are completely eliminated, that the remaining funds be allocated to the other utilities where the funds weren't eliminated using the same methodology I just discussed. And then finally, we do have concerns with some of the data on file with the commission, most certainly the category 3 arrearage data. We are aware that there are some inconsistencies between what is cumulative with that data in terms of what is cumulative and not cumulative. So it's not really, we don't really have the ability right now to do a comparison of actual arrearages in category 3 across the utilities at this time, and that needs to be cleaned up. We also need to validate with the utilities if their costs are inclusive of payment arrangements. I think including payment arrangements in this final count is fine, but it needs to be uniform across the utilities. And if that wasn't done, and the commission wants to go that way, then we need to validate with the utilities that they did give us that data or ask them to update. If you do accept staff's method, we do need all the utilities to provide their customer accounts information to the commission. Staff did send out a data request and most utilities replied, but not all. So we had to go back in time and find some data, some of it being 10 years old. And then set your time frames, obviously, and cutoffs for the data, so all the utilities are doing the same dates of data. But basically, what I really want to focus on is the data needs to be similar across the utilities, and that needs to be very defined with the utilities up front, because I think right now you have data. I think the data requests, some of them are mixed and matched, which is causing some problems with determining the appropriate final allocation. So with that, staff is available for questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Baker, and to the staff team for going through all the data. This is the time for commissioner questions now for our first panel. I have a few, and I know my colleagues have a few. I'll begin with Mr. Freeman. Director Freeman, you announced that you have $19.4 million, and the plan is to disperse that by Wednesday of next week. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it would be with our regular payment cycle on Wednesday of next week. We hope to do it today, but in looking at the final testing, we weren't satisfied. So we just want to make sure everything is perfectly set up for next week.
And did you state that you've already provided staff with an estimate of where that $19.4 million will be going to in terms of which utilities?
Yes, sir. It is provided to Mr. Baker and Mr. Hoppick by email. It breaks down by utility and jurisdiction.
Thank you. And is it safe to assume you'll be able to provide staff with the final actual numbers by close of business on Wednesday?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hoover, you were concerned about the fact that with respect to category number 3, which is the main event I think we're discussing here today, I think it's safe to assume from all parties that category 1 and category 2 will be satisfied and completely extinguished with the funds. So we're really focused on category 3, which the legislature only provided us with the terminology, the oldest arrearages. Those 3 words is all we really have to go on. They're concerned that some of the utilities cannot provide us with that data because they don't track it beyond a few months. I'm mindful that we're running out of time here. We only have a few more weeks before we reach June 30th. Do you have a proposed solution? Because the utilities are saying we can't provide that information because we don't have it.
Well, I think our thought is that actually ask them to go back and recheck this data. I mean, they provided it at some level, but I guess I'm a little suspicious that they cannot refine the data to make it clear as to the age or vintage, so to speak, of these arrearages. It would seem to us that there ought to be a process that they can go through to at least identify, maybe by the year of when some of these arrearages started to occur, so that you can then use that information to address the concern about dealing with the quote oldest arrearages that are possible. I also think that that information will be helpful to the commission in trying to determine how to allocate the money that's left over, because I think everyone concedes the fact that there's not going to be enough money left either between what Mr. Freeman's doing or the money that you've been given by the General Assembly to address all of the need of all the customers in category 3. So I think if we have a more precise accounting of the information of what's in there, it'll allow you to make a decision as to how to address this arrearage situation. Do we try to provide a benefit maybe across the board to a collection of customers that have these oldest arrearages, as opposed to trying to pay off the entire arrearage of a small subset of them. But I think without this, more detailed accounting information regarding the vintages of the arrearages and what they are, you're just basically kind of guessing and throwing darts at that, what is the largest pot. And I think what the General Assembly was after was, the first two categories are obviously trying to deal with those folks who've been directly affected by the COVID situation and the economic impacts of that. I think this was their attempt to try to deal with what they recognized has been a historic problem of, customers having large arrearages and that impeding their ability to either maintain service or reestablish service. So I think this was their attempt to try to take a stab at trying to address that historic problem.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. We'll hear from the utilities later on this morning, and perhaps the utilities can respond to Mr. Hoover's concern that we don't have a great deal of specificity with respect to some of the older arrearages in determining their vintage. Perhaps it's possible, perhaps it's not. I liken this to our allocation of a blueberry pie. And do we use a sharp knife, or do we use our hands to get these slices of pie to those neediest? And how quickly will that occur? Obviously, we could spend another 6 months and have a greater degree of specificity on how to surgically slice these pie parts. Or do we use our best efforts to get this money out the door quickly? So there's a balance between timeliness and accuracy. My hope is that every dollar is going to get to a needy customer, but that dollar may shift depending on the utility and the category of need. Thank you, Mr. Hoover. I'll open it up now to commissioners if they have questions for some of the other, any of the three panelists. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say at the outset that the commission, in my opinion, is in a difficult spot. I think all parties across the board, including legislative members, the legislature generally, the governor, the administration, the commission, we want to help people. We've endeavored to do that since the beginning of this pandemic. And what we're not in necessarily comfortable territory is the fact that the commission is not traditionally a social services agency. We are utility regulators, and it's a very different competency. But we find ourselves here for a multiple set of reasons, not all of which are unpreventable, so in my opinion. So I'm going to ask some difficult questions today, and to the extent that it makes some people feel uncomfortable, well, I'll not apologize for that, because it's tended to elicit a discussion of why we are where we are. So first of all, let me just ask OPC, Mr. Hoover, and then staff, I guess, to a certain degree, because I think you said the same thing. I think there's $73 million, if I'm correct on that you advocate be allocated first by OHEP, and then a recalculation be done on how we distribute the $83 million that we're going to allocate. And that all has to be done by June 30th, and we need time to get a report written, an order written, and get it out the door. The time is short. How do we do all that, as you suggest, under the statutory deadline?
Well, I won't speak for what Mr. Freeman could do, but I think given the fact that there's already fairly close coordination between OHEP and the utilities, and this is when we're talking about the category 1 individuals, it's a fairly defined group of customers. And I think it would be not that difficult to identify the arrearage amounts and then subtract from that the payments that Mr. Freeman is proposing to make with his money, so that then you can use the Relief Act money to address these other categories. And again, I think it's prudent to do that because we're still concerned about trying to address as much need as we can in category 3. So to the extent that you can spend Mr. Freeman's money to deal with the first two categories before you spend the money the General Assembly gave to you, you're providing yourself a larger pot of dollars to deal with category 3. So I don't think, again, I don't want to speak for, Mr. Freeman and the utilities, but it doesn't strike me that this is going to be very difficult to make this recalculation of this defined subset of residential customers that are in the category 1.
And would you envision that we would have to issue an order to make that occur?
I would think either you can make, issue an order or, issue instructions at the end of today's hearing once you've heard from the utilities as to their ability to do this, and in coordination with Mr. Freeman. I mean, obviously you have all of the relevant parties present today, so you may be able to craft something. And I would, liken it to the efforts that were done in the earlier proceedings as part of this docket, when the commission made, some relatively quick decisions about regarding termination policies and things like that. I think the ability to act quickly on this is there.
Yeah, verbal orders scare me because the ability to go back and assess compliance with verbal orders from the bench are difficult.
Commissioner O'Donnell, I think I appreciate where you're coming from, and I think there's going to be a point where we just have to draw a line in the sand and say pencils down, we have to work with what we have. Because we can keep churning and trying to get all the way up to the date, but it just won't be possible. But I think where we're coming from is it sounds like OHEP, at least we know as of next Wednesday, will be able to lower some of the category 1 funds. And I think that we can incorporate that those funds into this analysis. I'm not sure if Mr. Freeman has additional funds that he has available, but I do. If he does, while it would be pie in the sky ideal to lower the category 1 funds with those, if we can't do it by a date certain, and maybe that has to be June 1st, maybe that's May 25th. I don't take your pick. We draw a line in the sand and say we're going to use what OHEP has done up to that date, and we're not going to attempt to make any adjustments after that point just because we can't, I guess, in order to comply with that statute deadline. I think our intent is really let's attempt to first help as many as we can with OHEP's funds and then reassess the situation, but we shouldn't be doing this into perpetuity.
Yeah, of course not. And some of us will strive valiantly to adhere to statutory requirements, especially those of us who are students of the legislative process. But so are you talking about $19 million that Mr. Freeman alluded to? Or are you talking about $73 million? What funds are you talking about here, Mr. Baker?
I believe Mr. Freeman has $19 million, and those are the funds that I'm talking to, and those 19 would lower the current category 1 arrearages by 19, and I believe the category 1 arrearages are around 73 million right now, at least what's been reported to us.
Yeah, I just wanted to level set what group of funds we're talking about. Is it 73 million? Is it 19 million? What are we talking about? So, Mr. Freeman, let me turn to you, if I may. How much money have you returned to the federal government, or for assistance in this regard, or is in danger of having to be returned to the federal government?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. We have not returned any funds to the federal government at this point. The funds that we are looking to spend on these arrearages and in increasing benefits next year have to be spent 90% by September 30th, 2021. So at this point, if we proceed on this track, we're not at risk of returning any funds to the federal government.
Okay, because I think that maybe the legislature, part of the reason they handed this responsibility to the Public Service Commission was they lacked confidence in your ability to get these funds out the door. And we've seen that, Mr. Freeman. I'm going to be very honest with you. We've seen that. You've testified to us about your own frustrations with regard to your ability to get your funds out the door and into the hands. You've said, we have $150 million. We can't get it out the door. You told us that. And I'm frustrated by that because that's part of why we're here today. So speak to that. Why can't you get your funds out the door?
It is certainly a great frustration. As I mentioned earlier, we continue to work on reducing denials for missing documentation. A bill passed this session, House Bill 606, Senate Bill 392, which does change the eligibility criteria for EUSP. That will help significantly, increasing the eligibility limits for older households with older members. It also makes it easier to spend some of that arrearage money on a regular basis. I think most importantly, that bill produces a short-term work group to make recommendations for legislative and regulatory changes that would help ease some of the restrictions on the requirements. This year has certainly been a challenge in terms of certain local office operations, in terms of ensuring timely delivery of services, but we've worked through it. I agree with you. It is a great frustration of spending a lot of these dollars. It's something we talk about with our state colleagues in other states in terms of how to move a lot of these dollars. So, I know we received inquiries during this process about where do the documentary standards we apply come from. And I tried to make it clear that we don't come up with these. These are statutory, whether federal or state. They are regulatory, federal and state. They are from the audits we receive. So we're not coming up with these standards on our own. We're trying to work through them, and this work group to propose changes before January 1st, I think will move in the right direction in terms of streamlining quite a bit. Additionally, we are looking at full integration to the larger system, which I've spoken about in hearings before, by July 1, 2022. That will further streamline information sharing between human services programs and allow us to more quickly and accurately process cases. So there's a lot, going on in this area. My own thoughts, as I think we're showing now, we can make payments rather quickly. It's the challenge of qualifying people based on the income and other requirements of qualifying people for the program.
Well, let's explore that a little bit. When I became a brand new, newly minted legislator, and I was representing my constituency back in the 90s, I would enter state agencies at the deck plate level. That is to say, I'd call the 1-800 number that they would call when they had a problem, just so I would know what their frustrations were, what their challenges were, just so I had an innate feel for what that was, what they were telling me. And it was frustrating because the bureaucratic language, the bureaucracy, unless you had an advocate who was familiar with the lingo, you weren't going to get through it. You were going to get pushed to the side. And eventually that led me to go directly to the secretary and say, fix this problem. And they did. But I would periodically over the years, over several decades, still go back to that deck plate level, that 1-800 number level, to make sure I was still in touch with what the conditions were. And I have had a friend, the daughter of a friend actually, recently, who's a college graduate, engineering student, math major. educated. And I watched her try to enter your system, and I was blown away by the language. I couldn't even tell her what that meant. And I'm not completely uneducated or unable to discuss these matters. And I was blown away at how difficult that is. Unless she had an advocate saying, here's what this means, here's what they're asking you, here's what you have to do here, she never did get through. She's still wanting for assistance, even though I know she qualifies. And she's not getting it. Why? Because your system, when's the last time you went in at the deck plate level, at the 1-800 level, to see how your system works? When's the last time you did that, sir?
I've done it. I do it just about every week, sir. And are you talking about the online application process?
Yes.
Yes. Unfortunately, the program has not had any input into that process. We have not been consulted in the rebuild of that application. We are initiating discussions with the MD Think team to perhaps review particularly the energy assistance.
Initiating discussions, what does that mean? We're initiating discussions. We're talking about a June 30th deadline here, sir, to get millions of dollars into people's hands who desperately need it. Initiating discussions?
I don't know what to say. I'm frustrated by it too, sir. I do try it out, and you can ask the Office of People's Counsel. I do my best to weigh in on a program level. I oversee the program. I don't oversee that system. I don't oversee the website, and it's a great frustration to me.
Well, what are you doing about it? Were you running it up the flagpole, or are you running it up to your superiors, or are you having discussions with the secretary? What are you doing about it?
I've raised these concerns multiple times, sir.
Oh, come on.
I can't. I understand your frustration, sir, and
Do you know why the legislature doesn't have confidence in OHEP and has put this task on us? It's for the exact reason I just chronicled. You can't get your money out the door. They have no confidence you're going to get the assistance to the citizens that need it. That's why it's at our doorstep. And I'm just telling you the truth, Mr. Freeman. Do you get it?
Sir, I get it 100%. You can ask some of the others on this call today. I'm as frustrated as any others. I don't know what else to tell you.
Well, I had been pleased with performance improvement at OHEP over the years from when I first got to the commission, because it wasn't necessarily shiny, but I'd seen progress and I was pleased with that. But I am sorely disappointed today with the performance of OHEP and the ability to get assistance in the hands of the customers who need it. And I needed to express that to you today in this hearing.
I appreciate that, sir. I just want to make clear that if we had been told to pay the arrearages for the recipients of OHEP assistance over the last 4 years, that could have been done in a week's time.
Well, you could have gotten a lot more money out the door too if you'd have had your act together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioners have questions for these three panelists. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Freeman, do you expect to get any more than the 19.4 million out, say, before June 15th of this year? I'm trying to figure out, because you said that this next Wednesday, you expect to get out 19.4 million. And would we expect to see each week additional funds going out, or is there a, or not? That's
So,
what
I mean, yeah, we continue to make weekly payments. As I said, we continue to make our regular arrearage payments on an ongoing basis. So that does affect arrearage balances overall somewhat. What I alluded to is, and what we're hoping to do, is to catch those who are certified for OHEP for the first time after March 1st to really pay down those arrearages, just to ensure that whether or not they receive the regular arrearage benefits, that we're capturing them as well to pay down those arrearages. So there won't be regular tranches of arrearage payments going out outside the normal processes, but we're looking to capture those who are certified and new customers after that point in time.
So how much of I heard a lot of numbers, 73, 78, 81, 10, I heard a bunch of numbers. So how much more than the 19.4 million do you anticipate getting out between now and say a month from now?
Are you asking about overall payments, or a specific
I'm
type
asking
of-
about arrearages so that we, because we have to, as Mr. Baker said, we have to create a deadline, by which, we have to say, this is the amount of arrearages in bucket one. So we know that that's going to be reduced by about $20 million, but how much more do you anticipate it being reduced by, so we can have an understanding of where we are in category 3?
Very good. So we're averaging about $750,000 each week in regular arrearage payments. It is difficult to say whether or not those arrearage payments are being made to new customers who are unknown to the system previously, or those who've received benefits since February 2017. So some of those may fall into that group. It's very difficult to say. And then we wouldn't be able to project exactly what the arrearages for new OHEP customers would be that we would be looking to pay. I'd estimate they'd be just a couple more $1 million.
So we're really looking at a reduction of between maybe $20 and $25 million between now and when we would have to say pencils down. I
think that's right.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I understand where we are and where we could be in category 3. Mr. Baker, a number of the comments, I believe, suggested that we didn't really need to do the calculation to divide up the amount between electric and gas. We could just sort of, say that's not necessary. We're just going to go straight to, an arrearage is an arrearage, I guess. Do you have a response to those comments saying we don't need to go through the calculation that you went through?
Yeah, I think so. Those comments would be addressing, or their proposal is, I'll call it a pro rata approach, where they say what's the total arrears held by each utility, and then you just say what is that as a percent, and then you multiply that by the funds the commission has available, and then they just go and clear out arrearages from there. And so that is staff's concern with that approach. Is our reading of the language and the law was, to the extent practical, we should attempt to give the funds out on a population basis in the state. And so if you're going to attempt to follow that kind of a methodology, you have to first address the gap, separating the gas and electric funds. And so if you're going to use staff's approach, which is more detailed, I granted, you will need to first separate between gas and electric. If you're going to take the approach where you're just going to say an arrearage is an arrearage and you're not going to pay attention to the population portion, then you don't need to walk through that separation. So it is a much easier approach, but staff doesn't think it is as much in alignment with the law as our proposal is.
Well, let me just ask you about that. I mean, couldn't you take the population into account by using customer accounts instead of using gas and electric? I mean, isn't that a way to take to account for population?
Yes, and so that's what we do. The issue that you run into is that a gas customer will also have electric service. So if you were to just use customer count by utility, gas customers are going to get more funds. And so gas electric customers will have the ability to get more funds than just an electric only customer. And so that is the deficiency that we correct in our equation, where we basically say we basically set the total population in the state by electric, and then we reduce that and we treat each dual fuel customer and each gas customer as half electric and then half gas in terms of population. And that's why we do our initial bifurcation that way, so that you're not advantaging one set of customers over another set.
Okay, and Mr. Hoover, why do you think we shouldn't be doing that?
Because it's our view that it kind of turns the statute upside down. I mean,
Your argument is that, so your argument is a legal one, that the population part is less specific to the PSC than the, and that's your,
then the
you
three
know, are you,
priorities are listed, yes.
right, so are you saying then that we should just forget about the population part?
No, I think you address the population part by dealing with the three priorities. I mean, there are people who qualify within those three categories that live throughout the state. And we've seen that from the data that's already been provided. So if you provide the money to pay off the arrearages in addressing those three priorities, you are in fact going to be spreading the money across the population across the state. And I think it's just, you know, and again, if you're concerned about this timing situation, having to go through this relatively complicated process that staff has proposed to determine, you know, what the population is before you start giving the money out in the three priorities is going to chew up a fair amount of time. So our thought is, you know, deal with the priorities, because that's the specific instructions you were given by the General Assembly. And by doing that, you will address the population issue.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Baker, one last question. We're not doing any of your calculations until we get to category 3, right? Because we fully cover category 1 and category 2. Is that correct?
So no, we do, and so this is, I think, where us and OPC differ, and this just comes down to the statutory interpretation. We first bifurcate based off of population, and then you go down, and then each utility goes through category 1, category 2, and category 3. So versus they would first do category 1, category 2, and then then category 3 would be, I think Mr. Hoover in their comments mentioned population. So I think you would then do it at that point under OPC's method.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a similar question, Mr. Baker, to Commissioner Herman. So I guess she asked most of the questions I had, but with regards to the gas electric allocation, have you talked to the utilities at all about how they might administer this type of calculation? Again, I'm also just a little concerned by, you know, whether or not this is too complicated or not.
Can you clarify what you mean administrate? So you mean walk through category 1? Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. It just, you know, making sure, would we have the data, and with the utilities systems, you know, have you coordinated with them how they might administer this type of a distribution?
So separating the funds between the utilities, let me just walk through. So we sent a data request to the utilities to get customer counts. Most utilities have responded to us at this point, and what we didn't receive, we went back in history and found. So we can get the money to the utilities without them really having to do anything really more administrative, except for we need them to update their category 3 arrearages so everyone is uniform across the board. The administrative part on for them would be, once they have the money, distributing the money to the customers based off of category 1, category 2, and then category 3. I have not had a discussion with them. Well, we did have a discussion with the Exelon utilities a bit about our proposal, where once you get into, I guess we'll just say when you clear category 1 and category 2, but you don't get through 3, how you can separate those funds. Utilities, I think, have mostly proposed to just do a pro rata approach. So if they have enough funds to give everyone 20% reduction in their arrearages, that's what they would do. OPC is saying pay down the oldest first. And then our proposal was come up with a, I guess, an up to dollar amount so basically every customer gets $300 maybe. And what that's doing is the customers with lower arrearages will be removed from the threat of service termination. So that basically our view is if we can get customers out from the threat of service termination, that would be very good for customers, because under the other approach for pro rata, everyone's still going to be facing the threat of service termination. I don't know, what's not clear to me, and that might be a good question for the utilities, is how much of if that is an administrative burden or not. I'm not clear yet.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that answer. And again, I applaud staff for getting the data, going through the data, and coming up with these plans in coordination with OHEP and trying to do this in a very fair manner. So that question wasn't meant to disparage at all the work of staff, because I think you've done an outstanding job. I did have one other question. I think it was the fuel fund that raised the issue about bulk fuel and some customers, who get propane and oil and that type of those heat their home in that manner. Can you just tell me, is that within the legislative, I guess, parameters of what the direction we've been given, the commission's been given by the legislature? I mean, is that something we should be considering? And if we were to consider that, do we even have the data to be able to begin any type of allocation? I just wanted to, again, raise that as an issue that Fuel Fund raised, and it seemed to be a legitimate concern, but I wasn't sure if that even fit into what the legislative intent is that we are considering today.
I don't know if I did not see anything when I read that gave us the ability to do that. Maybe Mr. Hoover or Mr. Greger could weigh in if the commission has the authority to address those customers. I would just say I know we don't have the data today to address them, and I'm not sure how we would. I don't know how we would get the data to address that. I appreciate where they're coming from. Maybe Mr. Freeman can explain how they help bulk fuel customers, and maybe that's the more appropriate approach, is to let OHEP tackle them. But I don't know if the commission could actually help these customers, and I don't think we have the data to. But somebody could correct me if they believe I'm wrong.
Okay. Did anyone want to jump in on that question?
I would just add that, one, it would be very difficult to get the data on any bulk fuel arrearages or debts owed to bulk fuel providers. We're in the process of starting our end of the year reconciliation with the bulk fuel providers, and it can be a challenge. There's so many of them and so varied. I will just add that with the increases in LIHEAP funding and the availability, bulk fuel benefits next year, starting paying July 1, will be significantly higher and will take care of just about all bulk fuel costs for anybody for the entire year next year. And those funds can be used to pay down arrearages so long as we can guarantee deliveries to that household. So some of those funds can be applied toward debts owed. So that does help some people. But I never read this legislation as addressing bulk fuel either.
Okay, thank you. And I had another question, one other question for OPC, Mr. Hoover. I was interested to know if you had a reaction to, I think it was Washington Gas that suggested for the third category distribution that it might be tied to a bill payments plan requirement. Did you have any reaction to that suggestion?
I did see that. I guess we don't have a strong objection to that, although I do, as we stated earlier, I mean, my principal concern is trying to address this issue of more specificity as to what the arrearage amounts are. I guess the one thought I would have regarding tying it to a bill payment plan is if it's an old enough arrearage that this customer doesn't have any contact with WGL, that might make it a little more difficult to actually deal with that issue. But I think, incorporating it into a bill payment plan actually might make some sense.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I had a question with Mr. Hoover at OPC, and it touches on and perhaps follows up on the one that Commissioner Richard just asked regarding the treatment of payment plans under what I'll focus on the bucket 3 customers. We know, of course, that some utilities treat the
I think he froze.
Nope, we lost Commissioner Linton. He may be back in a few minutes, and we'll have him ask his questions. In the meantime, I do appreciate the comments we've heard from Director Freeman, Mr. Hoover, and Mr. Baker. I've started to actually chart out a timeline here that I would like to further explore later on today after we hear from the consumer advocates and the utilities. So I would ask if Director Freeman and Mr. Hoover could remain with us for the rest of the day. I'd like to pick your brain towards the end regarding a possible timeline that I would share with you and my colleagues. Commissioner Linton, are you back with us?
I am back. I guess I disappeared. I thought everybody else disappeared, and I realized that everybody was gone, so it must have been me. So,
okay, I bought you 2 minutes, so we'll turn back to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize to everyone. My question was for the Office of People's Counsel. I was curious as to, and it follows up on a question that Commissioner Richard just asked regarding the treatment or handling of the bucket 3 customers who have payment plans currently. How would you recommend we treat those customers where the money that's available after allocation is completed, those customers may still have an amount left over? What approach should the commission direct the utilities to follow with those situations?
I'm not quite sure I understand completely. So you're saying when an allocation is made to the category 3 customers to pay the arrearage, there's still an outstanding arrearage left for some of those customers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I think this actually does create, a difficult situation for the commission, trying to figure out what is the best way to allocate the pot of dollars to the category 3 customers to address this historic arrearage situation. Do you attempt to try to pay off all of the arrearages for a small select number of customers, or do you try to spread the payments out to make a contribution to a larger number of customers who have these historic arrearages? Not to beat a dead horse, but I think the more specificity we have regarding the vintages of these arrearages and what the amounts are and what they apply to customers will actually provide guidance to the commission in trying to figure out how to create the most significant benefit for the largest number of customers within that category. I think what we need to be concerned with is the fact that, the General Assembly, created this recovery fund to address a lot of different needs of a lot of citizens in the state of Maryland, but this is basically a one-shot deal. This is not going to be a continuing thing. So we need to be careful on how we go about doing that to provide the most significant benefit that we can to the largest number of customers within that category 3.
All right, yeah, that's actually an area that I think there's probably the place where the largest amount of challenge will come in.
Yeah.
A number of those customers have payment plans because the commission earlier this year, or late last year, directed the utilities to issue payment plans for some customers who are having challenges due to COVID. So all the utility companies under that order have been offering plans. So the additional funds today is a good thing, but the question of what do we do after the money's been used and customers still have debt outstanding? Is there a recommendation from OPC regarding the policy that we implement or should continue to implement after the money has been exhausted, but some customers still have outstanding debt?
Well, not to punt to something else that may be coming down the road, but the General Assembly did enact another piece of legislation that attempts to address energy burden and payment problems by customers. There may be an opportunity when the utilities file these plans that are required under that legislation to start to examine these issues regarding any arrearages that have been left over from the money that wasn't sufficient from this particular piece of legislation. There may be a possibility that we can look at that issue then and come up with a way to deal with those problems.
All right. That's all I had for now. Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. I did have one final follow-up question based on Commissioner Richards' questioning of Mr. Hoover. With respect to that Washington Gas proposal that some strings be attached to the payment of Category 3 arrearages by customers. Why is this not a proposal that OPC would strongly support? Because it would conceivably give extra protections to these customers. If they're on a payment plan, then they would not have any fear of disconnection under a payment plan and receiving these funds.
Well, as I mentioned, I mean, we're not opposed to this idea. I mean, we're still sort of thinking about it and probably would like to see, more specific details about how they plan on actually doing it once they get the arrearage amount. But, the concept is one that probably makes sense.
Okay, all right. It was your use of the word "we do not oppose." I would have thought OPC would strongly support some type of residential customer protections along those lines. But I do recognize that the proposal was only made on May 3rd and did not have a lot of specificity. Perhaps Washington Gas Light could provide us with a little more detail when it's their opportunity to speak later today. Thank you to these three panel agencies. At this time, we will turn and hear from our three consumer advocate groups that have requested time to speak today, beginning with representatives from the Maryland Fuel Fund. Hello, Ms. Brown.
Good morning, Chairman Stanek and Commissioners. Debbie Brown, Director of the Fuel Fund of Maryland. Joining me today is Sam Impink, Manager of the Utility Crisis Team. Thanks again for the opportunity for the Fuel Fund to give an overview of our submitted testimony, which really gave or highlighted 4 recommendations that we had for PS53, as well as 4 questions we had for today's hearing. As noted in our filing, over the last 15 months, the Fuel Fund has pivoted our eligibility model for our clients 4 times. Each of these model changes were communicated clearly and efficiently with our clients, both past and present. Each model change really allowed the Fuel Fund to be the eyes and ears for the low to moderate income community and what these individuals were experiencing with the utility crisis during COVID-19. As a result, the Fuel Fund of Maryland thoughtfully makes the following 4 recommendations to the Commission regarding use of PC53 funds. In our initial filing, we had asked for BG&E to stop sending turnoff notices to clients who fall within the Relief Act and PSC ruling. We are pleased to say to date, BG&E has stopped sending notices to those customers who have received OHEP for the current funding year. Additionally, Fuel Fund staff was able to work with the BGE customer service reps on clear and consistent messaging for our mutual clients. So that has been a big win. We also would ask the Commission to create a cutoff date similar to the eligibility date of February 15, 2017. We realize that there is a tremendous backlog at some of the OHEP offices, but the client shouldn't be penalized. As an example, if a client receives an OHEP grant for the current program year on May 3rd, which is after the arrearage spreadsheets were due to the PSC, they will still be eligible for Relief Act funds? That is one of our questions. Once a client's arrearages have been paid for the past 4 years, the Fuel Fund would recommend the highest balance of special needs clients be paid next. And lastly, we would like to have OHEP work directly with bulk fuel vendors, like what was asked with the state utility partners. Additionally, the Fuel Fund of Maryland would also like to take this opportunity to ask the following questions regarding the Relief Act funding. 1, will there be a cutoff date for a client to have received OHEP for fiscal year 21 to be eligible for the Relief Act funds, similar to the example that I gave a few moments ago? Once the arrearages for OHEP recipients in the last 4 years have been paid and funding is moved to the second priority group, what determination will be used to decide what special needs customers get paid first? And if the Relief Act funds are spent in its entirety before June 30th, 2021, will the moratorium on disconnects for non-pay for these clients be lifted? Or will it remain through June 30th, 2021? And as Commissioner Richard noted, why does the Relief Act funding not include bulk fuel recipients? We ask that because we have some customers who choose to receive the bulk fuel grant only and nothing for their utility. But we were under the impression that the wording of the order indicated anyone approved to receive an OHEP grant is eligible for Relief Act funds. That really concludes our summary. Sam and I are both available for any data updates from the Fuel Fund or any questions or answers that we can provide.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. We will return with some questions for you in a moment. We'll next turn to the next panelist, which is the National Historic Trust. Sorry, the National Housing Trust. Let's see, Mr. Nevo may not be with us. We'll turn to the Cancer Support Foundation.
Mr. Chairman, I think the gentleman was speaking, but Mr. Nevo was speaking, but he is apparently muted.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Mr. Nevo, if you could unmute yourself. I can see you now, Mr. Nevo. We can't hear you at all. You may be double muted. I cannot hear you. We'll get back to you, Mr. Nevo. We'll proceed with the Cancer Support Foundation.
Good morning. I'm Cindy Carter, Executive Director of Cancer Support Foundation. I'm also the co-founder of the Critical Medical Needs Program. In listening to this today, I'm a little bit concerned that it seems like most of the funding is going to go for those who have already been identified by OHEP. I have worked with that system for over a decade now, and it's extremely challenging, and I don't see a lot of improvements, except we did get the critical medical needs program, so we have been able to at least address some of the most vulnerable of the population. I would hope that there would be a way for a program to be set up for the distribution of these funds on the first and the second level, and then possibly into the third level, of those who obviously fit into the category, but have never been able to get through the OHEP system. So they're not in OHEP. Number one, the many people that are denied by OHEP, many times because of lack of documentation, even though they're eligible. So I would think that might be an easy way to go find some people there. Also, I found this out when we were down onto Annapolis this year with some legislation. There are 200,000 people in the state of Maryland that are on the food stamps list that do not get OHEP. A large number of those people would qualify for OHEP. So I would hope there would be a way for a connection to be made to the DHS agency that has the list of food stamps people. Try to get some money to them. A lot of them qualify for OHEP, but OHEP is a major, major challenge. Department of Aging, 41% of the population that are low income in the state of Maryland are our elderly population. And I know why a lot of them are not going to be in the OHEP rolls. It's a major challenge for them. I would hope that maybe by going through and picking up some of the food stamp recipients, some of the people that work with Department of Aging, that we might be able to pick up some of those clients. Also, payment plans. Our clients, when they're on a payment plan, if they qualified for the arrearage amount, they get the arrearage amount and it's credited to their account. And I've spoken to BG&E about this. The amount stays credited on their account. Now, unless that client knows they have to go and cancel the payment plan, that credit never gets used. Which, you know, as an accountant, that makes no sense to me. You have a credit in the account, but you have to cancel your payment plan because it's a separate contract. So I would hope that since a lot of people were encouraged to go on payment plans and did so during the pandemic, that you would look at the payment plans that were set up during the time of the pandemic and make sure that those got arrearages, and that this whole situation of a person has to notify the utility that now they want to cancel the payment plan to be able to use the arrearage. I hope that gets straightened out, because that's been an ongoing problem, and our clients used to miss a lot of getting arrearages because they did not know that they had to go in and cancel the payment plan. So those were the items that I wanted to add today, and I thank you very much.
Ms. Carter, I suspect that utilities will respond to the issue that you just mentioned. We'll turn back to Mr. Nevo.
Are you able to hear me now?
Loud and clear, thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Raymond Nevo. I do work at the National Housing Trust. I co-lead the Energy Efficiency for All Coalition for the state of Maryland. Our coalition works to make multifamily affordable housing for low-income families, to keep it affordable, make it energy efficient and healthier. However, I am here on behalf of myself. I am a Prince George's County resident, and I live in a district that has been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. I grew up in very low-income housing with leaky windows, poor insulation, mold, and our 800 square foot apartment during the winter and summer months would require us to pay 10 to 15% of our household income solely on electric during the winter and summer months. So I can imagine some of what thousands of Marylanders are experiencing, and today I will attempt to be a voice for them. I have 3 recommendations that I will go over briefly. The first is the Relief Act limits assistance to those who qualify for OHAP, and limiting access will exclude families in the most need. I think about my grandmother in this instance, who cannot access the internet. She has a limited amount of minutes that she can spend on her cell phone. She is wheelchair dependent. It would be nearly impossible for her to access the program. Because of that, I believe the PSC should tailor outreach and education about the protection to their residential customers, to customers calling in about payment troubles, to customers currently in arrearages, and to customers that are already in some part of the disconnection process. I do not believe a customer should need to have broadband internet or fancy knowledgeable language in order to access these funds, and I think we should eliminate as many hoops as possible. Second, the Relief Act lists families with special needs as eligible, and I asked the Commission to qualify children in school up to age 18 in this group. Even prior to the pandemic, internet was an unofficial requirement. It has become an official requirement, and the pandemic ending is not going to change that. And it is not okay to let children suffer the consequences of what has happened over the last year. Third, the Relief Act calls for dispersal of funds by population. And we have seen evidence in other states that dispersing relief funds by population leads to a severely inequitable distribution of funds, where communities with higher income populations receive more funds than they need, and communities with lower income populations do not receive enough funds that they would otherwise be entitled to. It is my recommendation that funds be dispersed by census tract that are identified to be in need of rental assistance or that qualify for SNAP program. In conclusion, I just want to say that I think it is easy for each of us to look at these customers as a number. And I want to remind everyone here that each of these numbers is a person, it's a human being, it's one of us. And as much as possible, we need to consider the person, not just the number. So I thank you for your time and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Naveau, for your recommendations. At this time, we'll turn to commissioners if they have questions for the panelists.
Mr.
Commissioner
Chairman,
O'Donnell.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to comment. I appreciate the comments of the cancer advocates and the housing advocate regarding the frustrations of people to access these funds. They're there, they're in the public interest, they're available, but the government is ineffective in getting these, in my opinion, in getting these funds out the door. And comments are very well appreciated because they're there. We can help people. And they are people, not numbers. And I just, it's very frustrating for me as a regulator and as a policymaker of sorts that these funds are not being made easily accessible to maybe hundreds of thousands of people in our state, whether you're young or old or have a certain malady. Government ought to be endeavoring to make it easy, not difficult, to access these assistance funds. So thank you for that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Seeing no additional questions, at this time, we'll take a brief recess until 11:30 a.m. We are in recess until 11:30 and we'll hear from the utilities. We'll go back on the record in less than 1 minute. Going on the record. At this point in our agenda, we will hear from the final panel for today, which is the utility panel, consisting of 6 of our larger utilities in the state. We'll begin with comments from the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. First, on behalf of the Exelon Utilities, Mr. Kevin McGowan, our Vice President of Regulatory Policy and Strategy for PHI, has some comments, and then individuals from our respective companies will provide some, will talk to our allocations of recommendations.
Great, thank you, and I'll keep comments short. So on behalf of the Exelon Utilities, we appreciate the opportunity to provide comments in this proceeding, and also appreciate the invitation to appear today to answer any questions on the information that we did provide. We believe the overall objective of the Relief Act funds is to provide assistance to those Maryland customers who need assistance, and therefore our comments support the allocation of the funds based on actual arrearage amounts. We have representatives, as was mentioned, from our customer care operations at both PEPCO, DPL, specifically Mr. Alston, and also Mr. Cloyd from BGE, to be available to answer really any questions on the data that we submitted, our proposed allocations, or any other questions on our application. So we look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGowan. We'll next turn to representative for the Potomac Edison Company.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Jeffrey Trout for Potomac Edison. Also with me is Alan Michael. We filed brief written comments along with our data back in April, and we basically stand by those comments. I would make just 2 additional observations based on the discussion so far this morning. The first is a suggestion was made by Mr. Hoover that the language in the statute about the 3 categories of recipients overrides and supplants the direction in the same statute with respect to apportioning the Relief Act monies to the extent practicable based on population. And I respectfully disagree with Mr. Hoover's legal analysis. My understanding of the principles of statutory interpretation include that the first rule is that wherever possible, you reconcile the language of a statute so that all parts can receive effect. It is possible to both use the 3 categories of recipients in the statute and to allocate the monies roughly based on population. Since it is possible to do that, there is no need to presume that there is a conflict and that some portion of the statute needs to be read out, and therefore all the provisions of the statute can and should be honored. That's the first point. The second point is a suggestion, and this is a suggestion that occurred to me personally. This is not necessarily coming from my client, but it's coming from me, about the dilemma that the commission finds itself in, the dilemma that you, Mr. Chairman, characterized is how do we divide the money, how do we divide the pie up Do we do it quickly and roughly like we were doing it with our hands, or do we try to do it with great precision with a very sharp knife? And I don't think, I think there's a way to do both. And the question is whether this way is consistent with the statute. And so I pose this as a suggestion, not as a recommendation, but you could, when you make your initial allocation of funds, include an allocation to what would amount to be a reserve fund that would still be held by the commission. Something like 5% or 7.5%, as much as 10%, would not go out the door in the first wave of arrearage retirements. The commission would have that, would take then later, take the funds that are in the reserve allocation and use it to address situations like Mr. Freeman adverted to. You're going to have some customers who contend they should have gotten funds but didn't. You're going to have some customers who contend they didn't get the right amount of funds. You could have situations where we thought we have retired all the arrearages in category 1 and category 2, but because of issues like that, we may not have. So you would be able to come back with better data and frankly a lot smaller set of problems, and then retire additional arrearages out of the reserve fund. This is something that I have not sketched out the details of how it would work because it just occurred to me over the course of this morning's conversation. And the big question in my mind is, would doing that be consistent with the language of the statute? I believe it would certainly be consistent with the intent, but the commission would need to satisfy itself that it was consistent with the direct language of the statute as well. If it is, I think that's an approach that's used in many business contexts, and that might work well here. And those are our comments.
Thank you, Mr. Trout, for those suggestions and recommendations. We'll next turn to the representative from the Washington Gas Light Company.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. John Dodge appearing on behalf of Washington Gas. I'm joined this morning by my colleagues Anthony Murdoch from our Customer Experience Business Unit and Aaron Gibson in our Regulatory Accounting Division. No formal comments to present. We're ready and willing to answer any questions that you may have. We're pleased to hear of the interest in our Tier 3 payment plan proposal, and specifically ready to answer any questions on that. And with that, I'll stop my comments and turn it back to the chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Dodge, perhaps now is the appropriate time to provide a little more description regarding that proposal in response to what you heard from Mr. Hoover.
Surely, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Murdoch first, or Mr. Gibson, as they come online and get ready. So I see Anthony has popped up, so I'll let Anthony address it first. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I assume this is more so related to the payment arrangement comment.
Correct. If you could provide a summary of what your proposal is with respect to Category 3 funds and customers on repayment plans.
Sure. Our customers on payment plans, our proposal is the customer recommends that we allocate the funds to Tier 3 customers to be distributed to ones on payment plans, as well as customers who are willing to sign up on payment plans in a specified period of 30 days post proposal. Those customers would receive the allocated funds. We would post it to their account and then set them up on a payment plan that a 12-month term. For our customers who are already on a payment plan, we would apply the funds to that particular customer's payment plan and then re-amortize the remaining balance of the plan, if there was one, therefore the customer remaining.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. We'll next hear from the representatives from the Southern Maryland Electric. Mr. Murdoch, if you could mute your microphone. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Mark McDougall on behalf of SMECO. Also with me is Lynette Stark and Susan Norris from the cooperative. First off, I just want to agree with Mr. Trout on the issue of statutory construction. I agree with him that that a statute ought to be construed or constructed so that all provisions, if possible, can be held as applicable. And so agreeing with Mr. Trout, I disagree with OPC's contention that the three priorities of allocation override the proportionality provision to make funds available in accordance with population statewide. Mr. Hoover also made some comments about how it may be easy for utilities to do certain things that would make the allocation, in his mind, more appropriate. And I'd like to, at this point, turn it over to Ms. Stark, who is familiar with that from SMECO's standpoint, and she'll be able to address that. So I'd like to turn it over to her now.
Hi. In response to OPC's proposal on page 3, the paragraph that begins category 3, the commission should allocate all remaining funds to utilities based upon a percentage of statewide residential customers. And in order to prioritize the elimination of the arrearage buckets, we are unable to comply with that request because of system limitations. Once the money that SMECO has with a customer reaches an age of 91 days or older, it's all in one bucket. And once it's in that bucket, we can't go back and say, okay, so is this money from 6 months ago? Is this money from a year ago? It's only in that one lump piece. So anywhere where it's mentioned about the going back and collecting the oldest arrearages in SMECO's area of expertise, it would only be the arrearages that are 91 days or older. That's the oldest we can go. Also, in reference to staff's proposal, where on page 5, the paragraph that begins, finally, staff recommends, as far as applying a fixed amount, SMECO can apply a fixed amount to any customer's account that we are given. However, if that fixed amount resulted in a credit, we would have no way of knowing that without looking at each individual customer and then removing that credit manually. And we don't feel like that would be in the best interest of the customers, our staff, to be able to do that. So we also had a question about staff's recommendation about running an optimization analysis. SMECO may or may not be able to comply with that based upon what an optimization analysis would be. Those are the comments that we have, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Stark, Mr. McDougall. Finally, we'll hear from representatives from the Chop Tank Electric Cooperative.
Good morning, Tiffany Troutman, Manager of Finance and Regulatory Affairs for Chop Tank Electric. Also with me today is Lisa DeSantis, Vice President and CFO, Tom Tyndall, Vice President of Member Services, and Ian Chenard, Manager of Collections and Energy Assistance. We don't have any formal comments to make today, but we are available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Troutman. At this point, we will turn to the commissioners for any questions of the utilities. Perhaps I'll start with a question for Ms. Stark or Mr. McDougall. I was wondering, could SMECO do accomplish a percentage approach? For example, pay off 50% of an individual customer's arrearage. Is that something that's possible with your system? I recognize there are system limitations based on what you just said.
I'm going to let Ms. Stark answer that question. She's more familiar with the system than I am.
So if we were to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, as of this date, this is what the customer's arrearage is, regardless of any financial transactions that take place after that, whether the customer paid or some other organization paid, yes, we could easily say, this is 50% of the arrearage, and that's what the payment would be. But we would have to make that determination ahead of time. In other words, we would have to say, as of this point, this is what it is, and any changes after that can't be made.
Is that a manual process, account by account, or is that something your IT systems can implement all at once?
It would have to be a manual process. So the way this may be getting into the weeds a little bit, but the way our payment processes work is that we receive a file, and that file is uploaded into a middleware that processes the payments. So what we would do is we would put in that payment file, this is what the payment should be. We would know that ahead of time, and then it would automatically apply to the customer's account. That's why if we knew that the 50%, so the customer owed, $800, we knew we were going to get 400, we would have 400 in that payment file. It would be a manual calculation, but then it would be processed automatically by our system.
Thank you for that. I recognize that some of this is relatively tech heavy for the larger utilities, and some of the small municipals or cooperatives may be able to accomplish this by hand, say for the town of Berlin. Ms. Stark, while I have you here, I wrote down a few questions for all of the utilities. You heard Director Freeman state that he'll be able to allocate arrearage retirement funds by next Wednesday. How long would it take for your utility to update the category 1 balances for the commission? 48 hours or a week, or about how long would it take you?
Well, once we got the payment in, it will take us about a day or so to verify all the accounts on that and make sure that the payment posts properly. And then I would say a week after that, after we have the payments posted, we could retrieve updated balances.
And we would only be looking for one number, the total balance. Is that, we don't need, obviously, customer account by customer account. So it would take about a week to get that balance?
Yes, because we would need to update the report that we have would need to be run, and then the data validated to come up, because we would have to do it individually, account by account, to see where everything fell.
This question is to all 6 utilities on the line. Would any utility need more than 1 week after receiving the update from OHEP on Wednesday to provide the commission with an updated balance? And please only speak if you would need more than a week.
Your Honor, I'll need to consult with Mr. Murdoch. Perhaps we could go last with our answer.
Okay. Well, I was just I was taking silence as consent. So, Mr. Murdoch, would you need more than a week?
More than a week would not be necessary for Washington Gas.
Thank you. I know the commission staff has provided all the utilities with data sets. Once we have our final numbers, would a 48-hour review period be reasonable for the utilities to check the commission's numbers and respond? Perhaps again, if the utility finds 48 hours unreasonable, if you could please speak up. Okay, I'll take silence as agreement there.
Mr. Chairman, 2 business days.
Yes, 2 business days.
I think we're fine with that. Thank you.
We discussed payment plans in light of Washington Gas's proposal. For utilities that submitted data with respect to Category 3, and all the utilities here did so, do those amounts include customer accounts that are on payment plans? I believe I heard they are with respect to SMECO, but with respect to other utilities, perhaps we'll start with PHI and BGE. Mr. McGowan, do you know if your Category 3 data included those customer accounts on payment plans, or were they excluded?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Mr. Alston and Mr. Cloyd just to verify that for PHI and BGE.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. For PHI, the data does include payment arrangements.
Okay, good morning. Yes, for BGE, our data had a specific column for deferred payment arrangements specified in DR number 3. So we called that out, and it should be included in the total.
Thank you. Perhaps it's easier if I ask if any of the utilities, are there any utilities that did not include customers on payment plans in category number 3?
SMECO included it, but we included it down at the bottom of the DR so that it was broken out separately.
Thank you. If I could revisit the WGL proposal once more with regard to payment plans, would the other utilities be able to implement that proposal if that's something that the commission either explores or ultimately approves? And if so, would you need to know that, would you need to set up a particular date certain in order to get your customers into a payment plan in exchange effectively for receiving category 3 funds? And perhaps again, is there a utility that would not be able to implement the WGL proposal?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Lloyd for BGE. Was the WGL proposal to start payment arrangements as a condition for receiving funds? I just want to make sure. We are working through a number of different scenarios to address applying relief assistance to customers in that category. Many customers already have payment plans, and we're planning to apply relief assistance dollars to those plans to work those down while keeping the plans intact if the rearage is not fully satisfied. So I think that will alleviate some of the customer concerns that Ms. Carter had earlier. But in terms of initiating or starting a payment plan, we weren't planning on that, and I think that would be a very big deal from a customer experience standpoint.
Let us hear back from Mr. Murdoch, but it was my understanding that the utilities all have 2 classes of customers. Those who are currently on payment plans, and those under WGL's proposal that would require those customers receiving category 3 funds to get on a payment plan. Is that correct, Mr. Murdoch, or did I get that wrong?
Yes, Chairman, that is correct.
Okay. And Mr. Cloyd, you're saying that it would be difficult to require a condition of receipt of category 3 funds to be on a plan?
Yes, I mean there are 10,000 customers or so, or 170,000 customers in that category 3. We have, I think, 37,000 active payment arrangements now. So trying to get that many customers on plans would be really unrealistic.
Mr. Murdoch, how is Washington Gas going to handle that? I recognize it's a logistical challenge. Do you need to work with each of the customers one by one, or are you just putting everybody on a plan, whether they like it or not, under your proposal?
We would do a customer outreach, Mr. Chairman, for those particular customers that we have identified that qualified for this, and they would either reply that they are interested in going on the payment plan where we would offer them the terms. It would be that simple for them.
And if they say no thanks to your payment plan offer, does that mean they would not receive the category 3 funds?
That is correct, if under that proposal.
So it is a quid pro quo. I do see Mr. Cloyd's concern, though, with outreach to 110,000 customers to make it a condition. Let me pause there. I have a few more questions. Oh, sorry. Did somebody want to speak?
Sure, Commissioner. This is Larry from PHI. In terms of customers being required to sign up on a deferred payment arrangement as a condition of receiving the relief funds, I agree with Mr. Murdoch's position on the customer outreach. Just as we've been
we've been performing outreach in the past. But the onus would be on the customer to sign up for a deferred payment arrangement. It would not restrict them from receiving their relief funds, but it would help with the concern of these customers being terminated or eligible for termination after receiving the relief funds. So the onus would be on the customer to get set up on a deferred payment arrangement.
Thank you, Mr. Alston. I do understand the benefit of getting on a payment plan, because then the customer would not have a fear of disconnection while they're on that payment plan and making payments. Although I do recognize the logistical challenge as well. And there is the question of whether the statute actually would allow the commission to imply or require conditions or strings attached with the disbursement of Category 3 funds. So I do need to think about that more. Let me turn to Commissioner Herman, who has a question. Her video is not working, but she's here and she's with us. Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I was just going to ask Mr. Dodge the question you just raised, Mr. Chairman, which is, Mr. Dodge, where's the statutory authority for requiring a payment arrangement?
It's a great question, Your Honor. I haven't written the law review article on it quite yet, but I would say, sort of following up on Mr. Trout's legal analysis, that the commission is vested with discretion in the administration of the Relief Act. And I don't see any prescription in the statute against the commission requiring reasonable conditions for receipt of relief. So on that basis, my tentative conclusion is that the commission has, within its enabling statute and given the breadth of the Relief Act, does have the statutory authority to impose such a condition.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I agree with you, and I'd have to think about it, but thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Cloyd, I have a follow-up question for you based on the chairman's line of questions.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Acknowledging the logistical concerns you have with contacting 133,000 customers and requiring them to come on a payment plan, would it be possible for BG&E to strongly suggest that option? Does that mitigate the concern at all?
It does. And I think, in our communications already, we continue to encourage customers with arrearages to pursue payment plans. So for us, it'll be, capitalizing on the communications that we intend to have with customers and the Relief Act to point out those options and direct them to those resources to start their plans. But yes, we can certainly increasingly emphasize those plans.
So to the extent that there's statutory challenges that Commissioner Herman raises with regard to our authority to attach conditions, maybe, I don't know, but maybe the route would be to use it as an opportunity to strongly encourage that.
Yep, we can do that. We already do a lot of that already. So this is part of our playbook. And, I think we're not in favor of the quid pro quo, though. I would say that's safe to say.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just interested in hearing from the utilities about the staff proposal on the allocation between gas and electric and the gas the gas electric joint customers. Do you have any issues or any concerns with staff proposal, or if we were to go forward with that, would that be as easy to administer as any other methodology?
Commissioner Richard, I think Michael Cloyd from BG can speak to that for both the utilities, and Mr. Alston can add to that to the extent he needs to for both Exelon utilities.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioner Richard. I appreciate your question. I think, you know, BGE and PHI really came at this from a different angle than staff and some of the other parties. And you know, we're trying to emphasize really the purpose of the law and the bill and the relief. And in the purest sense, empirically, that led us to understanding that arrearages was the best way to sort of do the allocation. So we've had a number of conversations with staff on their proposal. The mathematics are extremely complicated, and I credit them for reaching out and engaging us. I still don't think we're sort of following exactly, you know, the theory behind it, but you know, we do maintain that arrearages are a much better indicator. Population is, and again, the legal interpretations notwithstanding, just on the merits of the methodologies, you know, population has, you know, there's a lot of people like on this very call who are fortunate to be employed in the service of Marylanders that don't need, you know, the assistance that would be captured in that calculation. And then from Mr. Nevo, we heard that there's many limited income residents and customers who are not appropriately reflected. And so, you know, when we think about the simplest, elegant way to disperse these funds in a timely manner, if there is at all any legal standing for us to do this, and I would venture that it is highly correlated to population and customers anyway, the number of arrearages by utility, that would be in the best interest and address some of these inequalities and sort of the unique aspects of some of our service territories as well, and would also preclude the need to move money around in numerous steps, which I think is an important benefit for us as we're trying to expeditiously get this done before the 30th of June.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer. I understand the arguments on both sides. I was just trying to understand the administration of the proposal. If, you know, using the staff's argument, you know, if we were to go through these steps, would then the utilities be able to translate that that argument, I guess the equity argument, to your customers?
Yeah, I think we were struggling with the staff calculation and therefore sort of the translation of the rationale to customers. And I think, you know, just speaking for BGE, since we are the largest of, you know, only a handful of dual service utilities, we were especially concerned that our service territory customers weren't being appropriately represented in those calculations. So I don't think we ever got really comfortable sort of with their approach. But again, I do appreciate their collaboration in trying to get us there in a short period of time, and the challenges just with the data set, which I think is also another, you know, element to consider. If we're going to go through more rounds of data collection and analysis, we've already struggled up to this point to get, you know, a clear line of sight on what we're going to do. So I think the task is very challenging and very much uphill from here.
Okay, I'm not sure I got an answer to the question, but thank you. I did, since you're on, I have you here now. Do you have any response to the Cancer Foundation about payment plans and their issue with cancellations?
For BGE, I know we are working very carefully to create a seamless experience for customers in administering Relief Act, especially for those with payment plans. It's very simple. If your complete arrearage is settled with the relief assistance grant, whether it's in a payment plan or not, it just goes away. But if it's only partially settled, we're working behind the scenes to make sure that we reduce the amount of the payment plan by the relief aid, and continue, in the event that it's not enough to fully satisfy the arrearage, that the payment arrangement stays intact and the customer can kind of continue from that point on. So there will be no action from the customer to cancel a payment arrangement to get aid or to restart or anything. It'll all be a seamless experience for them. That's what we're working towards.
Okay, thank you. Is the representative from the Cancer Foundation still with us?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you heard the BG representative. Did that satisfy you, or do you have a follow-up?
That's good. That's excellent. Hopefully all that works smoothly. Working with BG&E has been very good. So I feel that, you know, they're going to have that under control, but thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a couple questions for the companies regarding a few of the other issues that have been raised in some of the comments from Office of People's Counsel and our technical staff. First, the Office of People's Counsel identified a couple of items regarding the importance of data collection and auditing after the money has been dispersed. In particular, they identified a few categories of areas that they thought utilities should report on post-money disbursement. So I wanted to get a response from utilities to see if they had any concerns with the categories that have been identified thus far. There may be additional ones, of course, but at least for the ones that have been identified thus far, are there any concerns? I can read them out.
Commissioner, none from the Exxon utility companies.
I think the primary one that they mentioned was detailed information about the age of the accounts to which Category 3 funds are applied. I know we've talked a little bit about that today. Is that something that all the companies can provide?
Commissioner, this is Larry from PHI. In terms of the aging of the customers' accounts, once you get past the 150-day bucket, the aging of the accounts is just 150 or greater, similar to the comment made earlier with the bucket being 90 days or greater. That's from a PEPCO perspective.
I figured there's a cutoff at some point for most of the companies. I'm just trying to make sure I understand if that's the case for everybody, or is there additional
That
information
is also true for Baltimore Gas and Electric, as it's similar to that of PEPCO. After a certain point, it's just all greater than rearages.
That's correct. I think it's after 360 days, and we're happy to provide updated aged arrearing data after relief funds are applied and be fully transparent in any other reporting after the fact.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and for Potomac Edison, it's 120 days.
Yes, and
For
for SMECO,
Chop
like
Tank,
I
it's
said, it's
90 days.
91.
Sorry, there were two speaking at the same time.
For
So
Chop Tank Electric, it's 90 days.
And for SMECO, it's 91. So same difference, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So along the same lines, for the suggestion that there be some type of statement publicly made that this is not utility money or shareholder money, but that it's rather money coming from the General Assembly in the state of Maryland. I'm assuming that can be done on the customer's bill if that's the way the commission directs that it go, or is that something that should be in a bill statement? Do the utilities have any recommendation on that point?
Good afternoon, Mike Flood again for BGE. BGE is planning to have a short bill message indicating the source of the funds for those recipients that receive a grant and also the amount as well.
Well, PEPCO is in alignment with the bill messaging.
So is Potomac Edison in alignment with the bill message?
Washington is in alignment with the bill message.
SMECO's in alignment with the bill message.
Okay.
Chop Tank is also in alignment with the bill message.
All right, thank you. My final question, we've touched on a little bit regarding just in general what happens with the funds that are left over after the money is dispersed. But I'm focused a little more on the company's collection practice post disbursement of funds. So to use a to take you through the hypothetical, we're now in August of this year. OHEP has distributed its money. The PC53 funds have also been distributed, and there will still be some customers with outstanding arrears. Some of them may be on payment plans, depending on the direction the commission provides, or depending upon the company's own determination to provide a payment plan. As of today, is it the company's intentions, for any of the companies, anyone can respond to this, is it your intentions to proceed with the usual COMAR collection process if the commission does not direct something different, or is it your intention to follow a different process?
Good afternoon, Mike Floyd again for BGE. I think, we haven't thought this far down the road, I'll be honest with you, but I think our inclination in revisiting the testimony and the documentation and just the hearings from PC53 last fall, we have to evaluate all the different tools that we have available, to help customers stay in service. And, payment plans, getting them to energy assistance, applying Relief Act. And unfortunately, resuming disconnects has sent a strong signal to customers as well to address their arrearages. And without that signal, some customers will just wait for moratoriums to kind of play out in perpetuity. So, it's not something we like to do. We want to keep customers in service. We have many steps. There's a 45-day turn-off notice period. But historically, the utility BGE has gotten a good response from customers after the disconnect. So I think thinking through it, we would probably be advocating for returning to some sense of before COVID. But that would be also subject to change on how things happen nationally with the course of the variants and vaccines and the economy. So we don't, we'll evaluate all the information as it sort of comes together.
This is Susan Norris with Southern Maryland Electric. Agreed with what was just stated in its fullity, as well as our approach that we've taken with a very strong customer outreach. Lots of communication, emails, but most recently we've adopted a two-step disconnect, so that if there's a process in place for the disconnect, we leave a notice, we don't physically turn it off, and we encourage the customer to contact us within a 24-hour window to make a partial payment, to set up a payment arrangement, to communicate with us what they're able to do so that we can have work with the customer.
Just to follow up on that, sorry, just to follow up on that very quickly, is that a actual visit to the property to leave a notice?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, this is Larry from PEPCO and Delmarva, and I share in the comments that were made, but I'd also add that we have instituted a cut review process in which we call customers between 24 to 48 hours before an account goes into the field. And then also if a field technician reaches a customer's door and they're a special needs customer or sensitive, and they verbally state this, remote learning, telework, or special needs, we do leave a note on the account, which is called warned in person, and gives the customer an additional 30 days to get set up on an arrangement, make a payment, or seek energy assistance as a part of the process as well. So we would default back to normal business practices, but also adding a few layers of empathy to where the customers may be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner, for Washington Gas, we would default to our normal COMAR practices along with any additional outreach that we have put in place as well.
All right, thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for answering the question. I know it's not one that's everybody likes to discuss in a forum such as this, but I think it's important for us to know for purposes of planning long-term how to address the challenge that we're all facing now. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Ms. Norris from SMECO, just a follow-up from Commissioner Linton's question, your response to him.
In terms of our process of disconnect,
So the question is, have you been able to evaluate the efficacy of your new two-step process, your 24-hour physical visit? What has that produced? Has it been successful? What have you observed?
yes, it has. Our approach has been to do every measure possible to prevent the interruption, and customers are proactive then in reaching out. We've established multiple payment arrangements just to work with the customer. Our disconnect numbers are extremely low.
Very good. I think that's important, and I think it's important for us to hear that that type of extra layer. And we heard some more, I think, from Mr. Alston is important. So thank you for that.
Certainly. Thank you.
Commissioner Richard.
I'm sorry, I don't have any questions. I
Okay.
didn't mute myself. That's what.
And that's all right. Well, thank you. I don't have any more questions. I did appreciate the responses to Commissioner Linton's questions regarding the tracking of vintage arrears. And it's quite obvious that utilities do it different ways: 90 days, 91 days, 120 days, 300 days. So to Mr. Hoover's point earlier, I think it's quite clear that we don't have apples and oranges to actually test the vintage of each arrear. I think the best we can do at this point is take a look at total arrearages. So that is a single number. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to propose a timeline for discussion, receive feedback from my fellow commissioners as well as the parties. And I think we are running out of time. That's clear. The commission needs some time to put together not only a directive shortly after this hearing concludes, but a final order on allocation. And that takes several steps. So I'd like to complete this phase of our proceeding by the end of this month, by the end of May, so that we'll be either on time or a little earlier to come out with a final determination before the end of next month. So if folks have their pencil and paper ready, this is something I'd like to sketch out for discussion based on everything I've heard today. On Wednesday, May 19th, and I'll go through this by dates and looking at my calendar here. By May 19th, next Wednesday, OHEP intends to pay down OHEP eligible customer arrears by $19.4 million, and they will report that information out by the end of that day, by close of business on Wednesday of next week. I would then propose that the utilities update their numbers by Friday, the 21st, close of business. So that's 2 full business days. And when I say update the numbers, it's simply taking the OHEP amount of your share of the 19.4 million and subtracting that from your total arrears to date. That's the first part of the proposed homework assignment. The second part would be then to update and correct any issues with your category 3 numbers. So effectively, within 48 hours of the OHEP disbursement, you provide 2 numbers to the commission. I would then propose that staff on Wednesday, May 26th, so Mr. Baker, I'm looking at you here, review the information that was submitted by the utilities and circulate the data back to the utilities for confirmation of accuracy. Again, that would be Wednesday, May 26th. That would allow the utilities several days to review, confirm that accuracy, and reply to the commission by close of business on Friday, May 28th. And at that point, as we heard earlier, it would be pencils down. That would be the final information that the commission has And the commission will then proceed to determine, in its judgment, the best and most equitable allocation methodology. So I'd like to hear from all interested parties regarding the feasibility of this. I recognize there's a few tight turnarounds, but this does bring us to the end of May, Friday, May 28th. Let me open it up to, well, I'll open it up to any parties, particularly if you have a concern with the feasibility.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, not a concern, just a clarification. You said there were 2 sets of numbers that you wanted updated as of Friday, May 21st.
Correct.
Can you please restate those 2 sets? I want to make sure I have those 2 sets of numbers correct.
The first number would effectively be your category 1 arrearages, less the amount that was provided by OHEP assistance. So we're talking about the $19.4 million that will be dispersed next Wednesday. So Director Freeman doesn't have his only responsibility would be to get that money out the door by next Wednesday. Mr. Ralph BG would get some percentage of that $19.4 million, and you would subtract that from your category 1 pool. And then with respect to category 3, the second data response that you need to provide, obviously that will, arrearages, the category 3 amount will subsequently change as well. And for you to get us that total arrearage number for category 3. I hope that is more.
If I may clarify as well, when we get this money next week, the arrearage balances will have changed because we provided arrearage information as of March, and now we are in May. So do we provide updated arrearage amounts for OHEP customers as of May, or just simple subtraction of the money that we got from OHEP from the March balances?
That is a very good question. To the extent that we could use more updated information as of a fixed date, let's say May 1st, so 2 weeks ago, would the utilities be able to accomplish that, running new numbers with a fixed date? Because I know each utility may have a different lag, whether it be 7 days or 14 days in compiling the information. So, Mr. Gibson, you raise a good point. Can we update the category 3 numbers by date certain? And I would just propose May 1st.
We can do that for April 30th, yes.
All right, okay, close of April 30th, all right.
Mr. Larry from PEPCO, we could do the same for PEPCO and Delmarva.
Could any of the utilities not on the call provide the most recent update by either April 30th or May 1st using that as a cutoff?
Chairman Stanek, this is Lynette from Southern Maryland Electric. Depending on when we get the payment in on Wednesday would affect our being able to have a 2-day turnaround. If we get the payment in at close of business, 5 o'clock on Wednesday, we won't be able to process those payments until the following day. And that only gives us like a day's turnaround to get the balances updated. So that's my only concern.
Would an extra business day plus the weekend help you out? So we move that May 21st date to May 24th?
Yes.
A follow-up, Mr. Chairman, to staff, Mr. Baker. Would staff be able to take the new April 30th numbers and the adjustment to those numbers and evaluate the utility numbers and report back to the utilities by the 26th or whenever? Can you do that in that time frame?
We will. Yeah, I think we can. If it would be helpful if the utilities could commit to giving it to us midday on Monday, if we could get that by noon, on Monday, that would be appreciated, because then that would give us still 2 days to process what if they were to have given us, if we can give it to them on Wednesday later in the day and we can get it earlier in the day Monday, that would, I think, be doable.
Thank you.
Mr. Baker, if we give the utilities that extra day, would you like an extra day? So it would be May 27th?
Yes, I would appreciate if we could certainly have it. I also am cognizant of you need the data, and so if we have to, go quicker on our end, we can attempt that, certainly.
Okay, let's do that. We move you back 1 business day. Of course, the utilities now, then instead of Friday, May 28th, we have a holiday on the following Monday. We're cutting it a little close, but we would have the utilities provide confirmation of accuracy on Monday or Tuesday, June 1st. Squeezes the commission just a little after the holiday, but gives a little breathing room for all the parties. And I recognize Commissioner O'Donnell's statement earlier that we try not to do things on the fly or from the bench, but recognizing that we do have a clock ticking on us. I thought I'd get the stakeholders' input at this point. Okay, so based on that timetable, that brings us to June 1st. Are there any concerns or issues that parties may have difficulty fulfilling?
My concerns are not with the utilities on the call. My concerns are with the utilities who aren't here today. So we have good representation from our big utilities, but we don't have any of the small utilities here. So we definitely, I think, Mr. Chairman, we definitely want to put this out in writing for them, and staff can follow up with emails afterwards to lay the groundwork to try and get this going smoothly as possible. But I just don't know what the munis and other small co-ops, what we're going to get from them.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. I recognize we have 8 of our largest utilities with us today, and it's unfortunate that some of the smaller utilities, both munis and co-ops, could not join us. I recognize they have resource limitations, but this is an important proceeding at the commission, and it's a rare proceeding where the commission is actually giving its regulated utilities a check. So it would be in their best interest to comply and respond. So I appreciate your efforts to conduct any outreach with them.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt. On that point, are we not going to hear from any of the municipalities today? They did have one request on the table, and I was hoping that they might explain their request for the additional $1 million. But it kind of leaves us sort of with a pending item if we don't hear from them at all.
They were all invited to participate. As you note, some of them submitted comments which were identical, typically in nature, with respect to that proposal. But you are correct; they are not here today to defend their proposal.
Okay, well, thank you. I would have had some questions just to better understand what their proposal is and why they were requesting it, but I appreciate that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional discussion or any concerns from my colleagues with my proposal?
Just a question, Mr. Chairman. In light of Mr. Baker's commentary regarding reducing it to writing, in light of my previous comments and your acknowledgement, can we turn a letter directive out reflecting this quickly? Is that possible?
That would be my hope, that that my proposal be reduced to writing and issued within the next day.
Thank you.
The commission will use best efforts to get this next item out, memorializing this timeline, and again, getting an order, well, not only getting an order out, but getting the funds dispersed to the utilities by the end of next month. Again, I thank all the state agencies, the consumer advocates, and the utilities for participating today.
Mr. Chairman, one final thing from OPC. related to this bill payment tied to the arrearage payment. After hearing the discussions from the utilities and the questions that were asked, I guess we share this concern about the so-called quid pro quo situation where the arrearage payment from the Relief Act is actually tied to the customer entering a bill payment arrangement. I think we are all in favor of carrots being offered and incentives to customers to actually do this, but we have a very serious concern that there be a direct linkage that in order to get the arrearage payment, you must enter a payment arrangement with the company.
And what is your concern, Mr. Hoover?
Well, we think that that is not, first, we don't think it's permitted under the Act. And secondly, we just don't think that it's a good policy to essentially leverage customers that way by forcing them into the bill payment arrangement. There may be lots of reasons why they want to do it, but ultimately it's the customer's call as to whether or not they want to enter a bill payment arrangement. And I don't think that either you should or that you can tie the payment that is being offered from the Relief Act to the customer actually agreeing as a condition of that receipt of payment to enter a bill payment arrangement.
Thank you. I do find OPC's position interesting and surprising in this case. I do see bill payments as arrangements as an opportunity for ratepayers to get their financial arrears in order while also providing some protections to the customers. I recognize there's some logistical challenges, but from this commissioner's perspective, I give WGL some amount of credit proposing this idea. I recognize that the legislation did not produce this idea on its own, but at the same time, there's no restriction in the statutory language that would prohibit the commission from attaching any strings to the receipt of these public funds. And I think, if possible, again, my position only, but I think it's more than appropriate for receipt of public funds to have some attachment and strings associated with it. But thank you for your comments, Mr. Hoover. Okay, if there's nothing further, and I'll just pause for a moment to see if there is anything further. Ms. Brown.
I'm going to turn it over to Sam.
Thanks, Commissioner. Sam Impink, Fuel Fund of Maryland. I just had a quick question. The updated arrearage date of April 30th, is that just for Category 3 or is that also Category 1?
Well, the Category 1 numbers will be more recent because it will reflect the any application of the OHEP monies on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. So the utilities should use their most accurate data for the Category 1 arrearages, less any OHEP payments. Does that make sense?
Yes, I just wanted to confirm that they would use the most recent and not continue, just subtract from March 31st.
Yes, they should use the most recent. They shouldn't be using older information if they have their April 30th or May 1st. I suspect the utilities do it different by month, but correct. And the utilities could use either April 30th or May 1st, if whatever's easiest for their system. Thank you, Ms. Rempick.
Thank you.
Okay, last call. Hearing none, thank you. I think this has been a struggle, but we're going to get the allocation. We're going to get the allocation right. There are a number of competing proposals that are all just and reasonable, but and the commission need not choose the most just and reasonable in the parties' perspectives, but any of the J and R proposals before the commission. So commission will use best efforts to get an issuance out tomorrow or at latest on Friday. And we'll do our best to contact those utilities that did not participate today. Again, my thanks to all who have submitted comments and testified here today. With that, this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.